Well, hello everybody, this is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to your critique of the week. It is Friday, December 6th. Thanks so much for joining me. Always so much fun to do these critiques every week, and we've got a great crew on hand, as we always do. Dr. Q is here, Monica Dobos, got Deke Coleman, Patty Arbor, Dick Westheimer, hey Dick. Lynn Schilling is here, Winston Munn, Zeev Smolensky, Brandis Askin, Chelsea McClellan, Jamie Thomas is here, Rose Lennard, Joe Barca, Shauna Gammons is here. Let's see. Katie Dozier in the next room. Let's see. Lisa Seidenberg is here. Hemet Malik. Sharon Ferrante. Ali Rowland. Jerry Stephenson. Good to see you, Jerry. It's been a bit in the Rattlecast. Shauna Gammons is here. Yeah. Clayton Clark. Yeah, Steve Harrell is here too. You got anybody over on Facebook? We've got Susan Nezel Reardon. Cindy Putnam Guntherman. Hey to you both. All right, and so we're going to have another fun critique of the week today, looking back at the oldest submissions in the queue. We're trying to race and catch up, see how close we can get so there's not as much of a delay in between the submissions. If you're wondering how this works, all you do if you'd like to have your poems critiqued by this wonderful group of people, and myself too, is go to rattle.com/critique, submit a couple poems, and then only to that category. We don't pull poems from general submissions, just if you want a poem critiqued, but that's all you have to do. And then wait your turn, and we'll get to you, and we'll talk about the poems in as much depth as we can. We'll try to make the poems better. We all leave as many comments as we can about what works, what doesn't, suggestions for where to go, different titles, whatever you can come up with, whatever you think could make the poem better, make the poet better. That's what we're trying to do here every week. And, yeah, like I said, we're going back in the oldest submissions in the queue today. I should say, too, there's a great episode, Dick just mentioned it over here on the chat and YouTube. Great episode of The Poetry Space just came out. You want to find that. That's Katie Dozier's podcast. I'm the co-host, and we talked about AI, which is an important thing for everybody. It's going to greatly just disrupt the way we do everything everywhere, including poetry. And some of it's frightening, some of it's positive. There's good things that can come about too if we use it, but as Katie says at the end of that episode, there's no way to put that back in the box, and so it's here, and we got to make the most of it, so we'll see how to do that. So check that out if you want to learn more about AI and what that means for poetry by going to, let me get a little bit, I like that light better, by going to the Poetry Space on iTunes. And you can just type in the Poetry Space on iTunes or Spotify or Amazon Music, wherever else you get your podcasts, and find that and give it a listen. All right, now let's dive in and look at the poems for today. And there's also a field for general questions, so I'll see if anybody has any general questions as we go to in the submissions, and don't. The first poet is Alexa Spahn from Florida. And Alexa's got two poems here. And the first one is Daddy Monday. All right. And two, if you're new here, I don't read these poems ahead of time. This is what it's like to read submissions. I have no idea what we're going to come across, and it's a chance, too, to see what an editor thinks as we encounter poems. So there's that fun aspect as well. So here we go. Daddy Monday. Always comes 11 times a year, yet those crocodile smiles are exclusive to reprimands on swamp banks, and baby sis Judy, respect is everything and then some. But those crocodile scales are exclusively for my voodoo doll taunts, respectfully me be better than you. Baby sis Judy saunters about free, and so my voodoo doll simmers, fire spilling in the water. Baby sis Judy staggers and locks eyes, small O's evaporating from her mouth. Fire raises to tornado, eyes turn toward the sky, small O's falling from our lips, scales protruding over skin, eyes locked on each other, grins emerging from ear to ear, scales matching one another flawlessly. We saunter off into the swamp together forever. And so that is Daddy Monday. Zeev Smolensky wants to know when was this submitted. If I didn't say, it was July 5th. We're up to. So trying to catch up I also, I think we only have, we have 57 left in the queue, which we used to have over 100, well over 100, 150, before we started doing it a little differently. I only did 2 poets at a time. But then we tried a little play catch up, and now we're getting more caught up. So I'm also sort of reminding more people that this is an option. So, and we'll get more submissions as we go. But anyway, so this is Daddy Monday, and as Morgan Fee says, I'm a bit lost, even the first few stanzas. Yeah, there's some interesting lines here. Daddy Monday always comes 50-11 times a year. I think that's my favorite part of the poem. That says first, Daddy Monday. I don't know what that means, but I like the concept of it. And it's sort of intriguing. It makes me curious a little bit about what's going to happen. And then always comes 50-11 times a year. I think there's a cute angle there, like a kid says, 50-11. I like that, the combination of Daddy Monday. And as Winston Munn says, there's a lot of music too. So that's a good opening. I like that. Yet those crocodile smiles are exclusive to reprimands on swamp banks and baby sis Judy. So those crocodile smiles are elusive. I'm not sure if we're talking, either we talk about real crocodiles when we talk with swamp banks. I'm starting to get a little lost already. And baby sis Judy, respect is everything and then some. So I don't know who baby sis Judy is or why we're going here. Baby sis Judy. It's a little strange syntactically. Yeah. And so as people are saying, I get lost with this and I don't really know. And then this is italicized like it's someone saying something, but I don't know who's saying it. So to some already, I love the first line in the title, but then I just start to slowly get lost, and then I get completely lost, and then I'm pretty much lost for most of the poem. So here it's a clarity issue because we just don't know, and you can look at the comments. Nobody really knows what's going on. But those crocodile scales were exclusively for my voodoo doll taunts. Respectfully, me be better than you, and so I don't know who's saying the me be better than you. Why the voodoo doll taunts, who baby sis Judy is. Baby sis Judy saunters about freely, and so my voodoo doll simmers. I don't understand the use of the voodoo doll either. Jamie Thomas says crocodile smiles like crocodile tears, the mask you have to put on every Monday when you go back to work. Oh, that's interesting. Hadn't thought of that. Yeah, as Brandon Eskin says, unique voice, I'm intrigued but a bit lost. Yeah. And Rose Lunch says it's a pantoum, and I was wondering that too. There's a way, so in a pantoum, lines 2 and 4 become 1 and 3. So we do have this pantoum nature, and I was going to check that because I wasn't sure, but it sounded like it as I was reading it. And then 3 becomes 4, and then 2 becomes 1, so this definitely is a pantoum. But it's a pantoum, yeah. So we're just lost. Jamie Thomas says it's a story of transformation from a workday Joe getting no respect to using magic to transform into an animal. Okay, well. So my voodoo doll simmers, fire spilling in the water, baby sis Judy staggers and locks eyes, small O's evaporating in her mouth. Fire rises to tornado, eyes turn toward the sky. Small O's falling from our lips. And so who is the R? Scales protruding over our skin. Eyes locked on each other, grins emerging from ear to ear, scales matching one another flawlessly. We saunter off into the swamp together forever. D. Coleman says, I'm probably way off, but I'm getting a dad that 2 siblings on a somewhat regular basis, and the kids compete for his attention. David Booth says, I'm seeing the kind of magical thinking of a child. It doesn't always make sense literally. Yeah. Tom Barlow says the stair-step layout works for me here. I think the nice thing about the way it's laid out is it sort of hides, it detracts. Where's this weird light coming from in my face? I don't know. Anyway, it sort of detracts from the pantoum aspect of it in a way that's nice, actually. I think it sort of hides the pantoum because you sort of are noticing the form. And we thought, like, I thought it was a pantoum as I was reading it, but I wasn't, like, sure. It was sort of in the back of my mind. And that sun, sorry, it's just in my eyes in a weird way. The sun's like right through the gap in the thing. Anyway, and so I actually like that stair step thing, but I'm still just a little too lost. And even if it's a baby, a childlike imagination, it's still, we don't know. The thing is, it's the basic thing we talk about all the time on here, but the who, what, why, where, when, those journalistic questions, that's what you want to, you get those out of the way, and then you be unusual and strange and jump in strange places. You need some kind of anchor, like some kind of touchstone to hold on to know where we are in the story. And I think, knowing who's speaking is a really basic level of that. And so if we knew who the voice was, is it baby sis Judy? So that's like the sister, so we're the sibling of baby sis Judy. And I think it is talking about daddy's attention. Is sort of the goal of it. You know what I mean? And so, so having some kind of like way that we know that we don't have to like piece that together and figure out who's talking. And, so use the I, use the first person pronoun to let us know someone's speaking. So we know who is, where we are. So we don't have this like sense of just floating in nebulous space. And I think that's the main thing. For this poem, is just that there's no anchor, there's no grounding, so we're sort of lost generally, even though there's really interesting lines. I kind of want to read it one more time, because I think it takes two. The other thing about this, too, is when you have to piece together, the truth is we're reading this poem on a show where we're trying to critique things. A regular reader is not going to give a poem like this that much time. It's too much of an ask. It's too much of an admission price, because the fact about poetry is too, there's only a certain number, even, for anybody, even somebody who loves and reads poetry all the time, there's only a certain number of poems that actually move you and you care about. And if you have to like work and piece together what's even going on the surface level, you're not going to read the whole thing. And so the fact that we can sit here and maybe figure out what it's probably about after talking about it as a group of 40 people for the course of 10 minutes, that's not good enough for clarity. People aren't going to actually read it that many times over and over again, unless maybe you've built up a reputation. That's where poetic reputation does come into play. If you're like a well-known poet, that you already have people who, if who's the poet? If Alexis Spahn wrote this, I know I'm going to love it, so I'm just going to work and try to figure this one out. That's a really different approach than just seeing a poem somewhere in a magazine or in a book you flip open at a library, or even the next book in a book you're enjoying. Like, you're not going to sit there and spend so much time to figure out what's going on, even if you could in theory. That's just not how we allot our time in the 21st century anyway. So, yeah. So as Jamie Thomas is saying right now, I will say, and I think Jamie is the biggest fan of the poem in the group. And Jamie says, I will say, if I had encountered this anywhere but here, I probably wouldn't have finished it. And that's the thing. So we need clarity. We need to know what's going on. And a lot of times the easiest way to do that is to add a title that explains what's going on. So, so Daddy Monday, we said we like the title in a vacuum and with the first line, but it doesn't help us figure out where the poem is or where we are. So if we add a poem that says, Big Sister talks about Daddy Monday, something like that we get a sense of the big sister talking, maybe an age, like some kind of sense of like what's going on and what they're talking about maybe, then we can enter the poem and have just enough of an anchor, like enough of a footing to want to keep walking in the poem. And that's what this is missing. So anyway, so this poem needs more anchor. And there's some nice lines. One thing I wanted to point out, I do like the format. I'm not a huge fan of fancy formats in poems, because I do think they tend to be distracting, and there's certain arbitrary nature a lot of times, which occasionally works. And, depending on how the poem is, it's also a pain in the butt to format as an editor too. So, unless you have a good reason, I wouldn't do poems like this, but I think this feels nice for the reason it hides the metaphor. The only thing I would avoid is just dropped forever. Every time you do this, highlighting a word by putting it in a different place on the page, it's like shouting it in a place that shouldn't be shouted. Like, it's like highlighting it in a way that throws you out of the poem. And so I would not drop the forever. It's like melodramatic. It's a melodramatic move to do, having the formatting of the poem itself tell you, because the poem is the music of speech. It's not the format on the page. The format of the page is a guide to performing the poem with your breath. And that's what the poem on the page is for. And it can change the way you alter and think about and express the poem as you're reading it to yourself or out loud. But having the poem be like adding emphasis like that to certain words, it doesn't work. It pulls you out of the poem and ruins that magical experience. So pull this forever up there too, I would say. Yeah. Okay, well, let's move on to the next poem. So again, that was the first poem by Alexis Span. And the next poem is this. Uh-oh. Let me try. Sometimes Submittable does this. We'll refresh the page and see if it works. There we go. Okay. And we're a little small. Let's get a little bigger. Goes right up to the edge. Okay. So this is what freedom looks like to a black woman. And so here we have a title that's situating us within the poem. So that's helpful. What freedom looks like to a black woman. It looks like a church pew on Sunday, Wednesday, and vacation Bible school every summer. A breeze on a secluded blanket in the park as your boyfriend fingers you slowly, then quickly into bliss like the wind rushing past. As the train pulls into Myrtle Wyckoff Station while talking to your mom. That's why I don't say hi to black bitches, even the nerdy ones are mean. Muggings and casual bullets catching strays and innocuous gossip about Antoinette and the Nem and how she and who can't keep a man waiting in the car after having self-control to walk away, lest you be shot in the feet. Everyone knows you should avoid that dance called the Brokefoot Girl. All you gotta do is bow down to every passerby, male, white, and all shades in between, and not let on that you know what you do till eventually you're not their mirror or their mother, just a zombie waiting to die. And this is what freedom looks like to a black woman. And, so it looks like a church pew on Sunday, Wednesday, and vacation Bible school every summer. I think Winston Munn's talking when Winston says, I like the title in the first line, but quickly get lost and disappointed. I think that's this poem he's talking about. I do like the first line. It's a nice, it's a surprising place to go. What freedom looks like to a black woman, and then it looks like a church pew on Sunday, Wednesday, and vacation Bible school every summer. So I really like the opening there. A breeze on a secluded blanket in the park as your boyfriend fingers you slowly, then quickly into bliss like wind rushing past as the train pulls into Myrtle Wharf Station while talking to your mom. So up to there, I really like that too. There's a nice energy to it. You feel him like I kind of wanted to stop at some point. Winston Monica Dovos was talking about the previous poem, I think. Winston was. Yeah, anyway. Yeah, so there's a nice a pull to the poem. You can feel like you want to keep reading. And we talk sometimes about the use of punctuation, whether or not it's necessary. And I think this poem, the last poem too, wasn't bad as far as the punctuation goes. We didn't get confused and lost by having little punctuation. And it adds to the compelling nature of the poem. We're pulled along to the poem. And part of it is because there's no pause. There's no pause where we just keep going. And so I think that works really well. And of course, we're being pulled as the train pulls into Myrtle Wyckoff Station while talking to your mom. That's why I don't say hi to black bitches. Even the nerdy ones are mean. And here we have the same problem as the last poem, where we have this dialogue that's italicized and set aside, but I don't know who's saying it. So it ends up, to me, being like a voice sort of from the void. I don't know. I don't know if it's the mom or if it's the speaker who's saying that. Or someone else. It's just sort of a disembodied voice. And so having some attachment to that would, I think, help a lot there. Yeah, as Morgan Fee says, by confused after mom, maybe a full stop there. I like the energy, but maybe a bit punctuation would help. I think this transition, I think it's just the leap into the dialogue where we don't know who's saying it. And there was something else too. Yeah, where somebody said, I can't find it anymore. Yeah, Jerry Stephens says, I like the last poem, good title, good first few lines, and slips off the rails. Yeah. Okay, well, we'll keep going. So I'm a little lost again about who's saying this. There's a tendency in both these poems to have that disembodied feel where we don't know exactly like what on a literal level, like on the most basic. We want to have ambiguity and have poems like not tell the full story so you can connect the gaps and there'd be surprise and mystery in that. But we want to have enough that we're sort of grounded on the just basic physical details, and we're a little bit lost there because I don't know who's saying this. But muggings and casual bullets, catching strays and innocuous gossip about Antoinette and Nem and how she and who can't keep a man, waiting in the car after having the self-control to walk away. So notice the difference in the poem, where we have all these really rich, and a lot of people mention the great details in the first 4 lines. We have the church pews, we have the breeze on a secluded blanket, the boyfriend fingering, we have the bliss like the wind rushing past the train poles, not just away, but into Myrtle Wyckoff Station. And so we have this really rich feel of details. And then we go into just more general, not specific. They're very general details. Muggings, casual bullets, catching strays, innocuous gossip. So we pull back into this generality, and the poem loses a lot of life there. Why not have a specific thing? We have Antoinette and Nem, and so we have a little bit of detail there, but then we go back into how she can't keep a man, which is a very general thing to say. If it was a specific man, or if there was a way that came to life with a lot of detail, then this would be as compelling as the first 4 lines. But we lose that sense. Lest to be shot in the feet, everyone knows you should avoid that dance called the Brokefoot Girl. I like the dance called the Brokefoot Girl. That's a little bit more engaging. All you got to do is bow down to every passerby, male, white, and all shades in between. And so we're getting sort of moralized generalities, and the poem loses its energy. And that's the main thing I want to point out. So if we stick in this voice and continue on, I think the poem would be great. But we lose, I think that's where, I think it was Joe Barker maybe mentioned, it feels like it goes off the rails. And I think that's how it goes off the rails, by getting sort of general and moralizing instead of letting the images and the scenes tell their own story. Passerby, male, white, and all shades in between, and not let on that you know what you do till eventually you're not their mirror or their mother, just a zombie waiting to die. And the mirror and mother is interesting. I like the sound of that. The whole poem, I should say, too, has a really nice sound and rhythm to it. In addition to being pulled, there's a real energy in the voice. And then, like Dick said, I think just a zombie waiting to die feels too easy. I think if I can find Dick's comment again. Dick Westheimer says, I am engaged all the way through. I do find the ending too easy, like the poet took the first exit ramp. There was a poet, or poem, I should say, that to show how, what was the poem called? It was a Rattle Poetry Prize winner. Which one won? There's so many great poems by Patricia. Oh yeah, that's what it's called. So let me just really quick, I'm not going to read the whole poem. I'll read maybe the first stanza and the last stanza. This was a Rattle Poetry Prize winner from back in 2011. This is Patricia Smith with Tavern, Church, Shuttered Tavern. And so we go through this bus ride, right? Tavern, church, shuttered tavern, then Goldblatt with its finger-smeared display windows full of stifled plaid and pinafore and hard-tailored serge, each unattainable thread cooing the delayed lusciousness of layaway. Another church, then, of course, Jesus pitching a blustery bitch in every other block. Then the butcher shop, with inexplicably the blanched, archaic head of a hog propped upright to lure waffling patrons into the steamy innards of yet another storefront, where they drag their feet through sawdust and revel in the come-hither bouquet of blood. Then a vacant lot, then another vacant lot, right up against a shoe store specializing in unyielding leather, all-stars and glittered stacked heels designed for the Christian woman daring the jukebox. Then the whatnot joint with vanilla iced long johns, wax lips crammed with sugar water, notebook paper, swollen sour pickles buoyant in a splintered barrel, school supplies, pixie sticks, licorice whips, and vaguely warped 45s by Fontella Bass or Johnny Taylor. Now, ooh, what's that blue pepper piercing the air with the nouns of backwood and cheap delta cuts, neck and gizzard, skin and claw? It's the chicken shack, wobbling on a foundation of board, greasing, riding relentless on 3 of its walls. The slick cuisine served up in virgin white cardboard boxes with Tabasco fiasco, nibbling the seams, scorched wings under soaked slices of wonder, blind perch fried limp, spiced like a mistake Mississippi Don made. And speaking of, July moans around a perfect perfumed tangle of 8 Baptist gals in the corner of Madison and Warren, fanning themselves with their own impending funerals, fluid-filled ankles like tree trunks, sprouting from narrow slingbacks, choking in Sears' best cinnamon tinged hose, their legs so unlike their arms and faces on the other side of the street is everything they are trying to be beyond, everything they are trying to ignore, in grade promise of government 25 floors of lying windows, of peeling grates called balconies, of yellow panties and shredded diapers fluttering from open windows, of them nasty girls with White Avenue hips stomping double Dutch in the concrete courtyard, spewing their women verses, too fueled and irreversible to be not listened to but wiggled against, and the Madison Street bus revs its tired engine, backs up a little for traction, and drives smoothly into the sweaty space between their legs, the only route out of the day we're riding through. And so I meant to only read the first and last, but you can't stop kind of when the details are that rich. And you see the difference between, this is like fully realized, being completely rich in detail. And we go on and on and on until the details themselves emerge with an ending where the engine, the bus revs its tired engine, backs up a little for traction, and drives smoothly into the sweaty space between their legs, the only route out of the day we're riding through. And where it becomes a very surprising, surreal turn without the overt commentary, and so we push through all these really rich details and images that are so engaging with the same kind of rhythmic, intense, energy-filled voice. And if you go back to the other poem here, it starts out that way, with these great details. And then we go into the vagueness, and then it comes into a sort of a summary type statement ending. And a poem like this wants to just push, like lay on the gas pedal, no pun intended, of those details and let the poem take care of itself. And that's the thing this poem isn't doing. So again, it's a great start to a poem. Really love the first 4 lines, and they're long lines, so that's a lot of words. And then just keep that up and see where it takes you. Don't take the first exit. As Dick said, this sort of takes the first exit ramp. See how far you can push into this concept, because it's a really great idea. I think the poem is just unfinished, really, and it sort of lost its energy and then took an ending where it really should have just been pushing, like that Patricia Smith poem does. Okay, so I think that's all I have to say, and yeah. Okay. So anyway, we're gonna move on. That's a lot of talk about this one promo. Really, really interesting things to talk about here. So I think the most interesting, critique of the week submissions are the ones that are like right on the fence of being great. So there's a lot of really energy and great details in this voice. Just adding that little extra and pushing it farther and keeping it what's working is where to go. So I think that's a great place. Now let's move on to the next poet here. And next in line, we have, this is Nicholas Baldwin from Penfield, New York, near my hometown of Rochester. Got some shortish, or at least one short poem here. Let me check if there's any questions. General question from Nicholas. My poetry is typically based in reality. Sadly, this one is. As a reader of a poem like this, can you tell it may be based on a real event? And how does it physically make the reader feel upon first reading? Okay. So this is Understanding Overdose. And again, the poet is Nicholas Baldwin. Oh, and I forgot to re-say the last poet's name, just so you know if you came in later. It's Alexa Spahn from Florida was that last poem. And this poem now, again, is Nicholas Baldwin. And it's Understanding Overdose. The first time we kissed at midnight, your lips were icy and eyes were missing. I held your lifeless hand against mine and put it, fingers splayed, against my chest, so you could feel my racing heart and my lungs breathe. Please just mimic my breathing, I screamed. Do as I do, breathe, wake up, breathe like me, breathe. I blow oven-like breath into your lungs. You inflate, then deflate when I stop kissing you. Then I deflate again and again. Then I admit defeat. So it's Understanding Overdose. And so here, I think there's an interesting, so how did the feel of it, how does it emotionally resonate? I think, to me, toward the second half, I think the best part of the poem is I blow oven-like breath into your lungs. You inflate, then deflate. When I stop kissing you, then I deflate again and again. It's focusing in again on what we talked about already. Focusing on the specific details is where the emotion really lives. And so I think this, because we got the deflating and inflating, that kind of aspect is where the poem lands. As Tom Barlow says, seems a bit lean, and it does. So I think I think the real poem lives in this section right here. And how can we expand on that experience and that take the emotional energy of that? And as Joe Barker says, Joe Barker wants more, and I want more too. I want this. I want to really feel that experience, because that's really what art is all about. Is having the complexity of the world fixed into a form that we can share and understand each other. We live a more broad life by having literature, because we get to live the lives of other people through poetry, and so having that experience and understanding what that was like is what's great about poetry, and so expanding on that thing that's really working, I think, is what works. Morgan Phoenix says, "I want more of an understanding of who you are, who and I are. It doesn't seem to feel real without images." Yeah, and Mary King says it would be good to know who the speaker is. This is an EMT's father, sister, friend. Yeah. So, and the title too, Understanding Overdose. I'm not sure. I don't feel like I understand overdose more because of reading this poem. I understand the feel of encountering an overdose, which is a little different than what the title says. Yeah. And Clayton Clark says, I want more would expand into larger world. Yeah. So let's look again. The first time we kissed at midnight, your lips were icy and eyes were missing. Lips being icy is not a great description. It's border cliche. Eyes were missing is interesting. You expected to say something else. So that's a nice line. Someone pointed out they liked that. Yeah. I held your lifeless hand against mine, put it fingers splayed against my chest, so you could feel my heart race, or my racing heart. Again, racing heart is a bit of a cliche. And when we don't know the relationship between the two, a lot of this stuff doesn't have the emotional energy either. I think that's what Mary, who was it? Mary Keating said that? Yeah. Mary Keating said that, knowing what the situation is more would be, make us feel that emotion more strongly. So setting it up, again, with context, letting us know what's actually going on. Don't withhold those basic details, the who, what, why, where, when, and how, so that we can engage and we can step into your shoes and then feel the feeling. Yeah. Mark Grinier says, I think the strength in this is in the cry of the speaker as he tries to resuscitate the girl. The understanding is that one of the speaker, who is probably using two. Yeah, that's my interpretation of it, I should say. I think it was two people who were doing drugs together, and then the overdose. One of them ended up with an overdose. Yeah, Beth Jefferson says it's weird to call it kissing if it's a stranger. And it's the first time we kissed at midnight, which is an interesting detail too, because I think that implies to me, I think, that they kiss other times, but it just happened to be a midnight kiss, like a New Year's Eve reference, But this midnight kiss was a very different type of day. Petty Eber says, what if the poem began with please just mimic? Would start with the energy, then see what happens. Yeah, that's the thing. Start with the energy and see what happens. I was just talking to Lou Watts in an interview you guys will read in the spring Hyben issue. And the fascinating thing about Lou Watts, the really great Hyben poet, is that everything he does has this basic thing to it, where he loves fly fishing, he's a geologist, and he's a caver too. And all those things are about like exploring, like looking for clues to see what's underneath, to see where the energy is, I mean, he was a oil and gas geologist. And so figuring out where the actual oil deposits were was his job. And so, to do that, you look for the clues. And what we do as a poet is look for the clues to where the energy is. It's the exact same thing. Like where is the energy? And the energy here is in that description. So start there and then see. Once you let the energy out, see where it goes. And that's really how writing should be done. And so, Yeah, so where was the start? Yeah, please just mimic. Where was the please just mimic? It shows the lungs. Yeah, please just mimic my breathing. I scream, do as I do, breathe. Wake up, breathe. Like me, breathe. I think the dialogue, too, isn't as strong as the rest. I would start it, I blow oven-like breath into your lungs. I think that's a great opening. And really, sets in media race. It's like right when that's going on. And then describe the feelings of it and then see where that takes you. Because what you're doing when you're writing a poem, you're trying to figure out what the emotion is that needs to be released. I mean, that's what we talk about when we talk about energy. It's an emotional energy. And what is that emotion there? And if we start out with where the energy is starting to come up, and then we can see what that actually is in that deposit, And so understanding overdose could be the title still to sort of situate it a little bit. And then I blow oven-like breath into your lungs. You inflate, then deflate. And then continue describing what that was like in the moment. And then the poem goes there. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's all I'm going to say about that. I think it's another partial poem where soon, the exit ramp we talked about before, I think it sort of, as soon as it found something worth writing about, it stopped, And I think that the real thing is right here. So start there and see where the poem takes you. See where that voice takes you. Don't think of it as your voice. Think of it as someone else's voice or some deeper used voice, and see what that voice wants to say. JB suggests maybe make the first line the title. That's an interesting idea. I mean, we have no idea where the poem's going to go once we write that out, though. But that could mean, I admit defeat is a very, I'm sort of done with this poem. I'm almost like I admit defeat in the poem. Like, I admit, this is all I can say right now about it. So I admit defeat for the situation, but also the poem. And I think that's where we went wrong. But maybe as a title, but we'll see. Once the poem sort of comes out, and you see where it actually wants to go, then we can figure out the title. And of course, what we want to do with the title is have something that adds to the poem, either with some cut that makes you think about it a different way, a description that helps you understand what's going on, something like that. And so once we do that, we can figure out the poem. But we can't really talk about more. And a couple other details about the poem. I think the use of line breaks are actually nice in the poem. There's a nice sense of purpose to the length of the lines. I think that works nice. So a good voice there, we can say, and just keep it going with how it's moving in these three lines. All right, let's move on. That was the only poem submitted here, and again, that poet was Nicholas Baldwin from New York. Let's go next to, let's see who's here. Here's this poem. Let me see if we have a note first. No notes, just the poem, and just one poem. Another short poem. So we'll get through it quick. This poet is Ziv Smolansky. That's funny. I was wondering, because Ziv asked where we are in the submissions earlier, just in the chat thread, and I was wondering if it was because Ziv had one coming up. And there we go, 3 poems in. So mystery solved. This is called In the Classical Lovely Cities. So here you go. Make it bigger. And again, a very short poem. In the classical lovely cities. In the lovely classical cities, in the hospitals, sick people deteriorating and dying, the doctors apologize, their hands are clean and empty, on the headstone marble a green lizard will bask in the fine sun. Thus, in the classical lovely cities, alas, also the sonata by Dvorak drives me nuts. Well, that's interesting. So I love the tightness of the details of some of this. That the thing that I don't, so the Dvorak drives me nuts. I don't understand that line. That might be a reference that I don't know. I'm not a big classical music listener. And so maybe there's a direct reference to Dvorak that I'm not sure about, but I don't know what that means really. But I love, I think the title being sort of repeated, but with a little inverse. Yeah, Morgan Phoenix says it just confuses me. I don't know if it's necessary. If we've had a different title, I mean, I'm even thinking even though I don't know what this means, What if the title was "This Sonata by Dvorak Drives Me Nuts"? Instead of that, we cut this title and then just jump in the poem there. Because I think the classical lovely cities going to lovely classical cities, it doesn't really add anything. And so Margarita says, I don't think the last line is part of the poem. And maybe that's true. Steve Smolensky says it's pronounced Dvorak. Okay, Dvorak. Yeah. So anyway, so I would maybe think about this as the title. As a cut, there is a kind of, it's a leap to what we're talking about. And so I think that might be nice as a title. This doesn't provide much. But what I do love about the poem is everything, this whole stanza, I really like. In the lovely classical cities and the hospitals, and we have a nice, again, this is the fourth poem in a row, I think, with no punctuation, and pretty well done with no punctuation. There's a nice way that the lack of punctuation, there's 2 commas, the poem reveals itself through the line breaks, and it's paced really well because of that. So that's the first thing that's nice. And then the details are really precise, very concrete, and very evocative. So we have in the lovely classical cities, which evokes a sort of idea. And then we have a surprise sort of shift in the hospitals, sick people deteriorating and dying. And so we have we think maybe we're going to go to a happy place and we go to a sad place, so there's a transition there. And then the doctors apologize. Their hands are clean and empty. I think that's such a great detail. It's so simple, but their hands are clean and empty. It's just really wonderful. And then we jump again. On the headstone marble, a green lizard will bask in the fine sun. And we sort of have this, we go back to the kind of feeling that the first lines were evoking. Yeah. And so that's nice too. Thus, in the classical lovely cities, alas, also the sonata by Dvorak, sorry, I just don't know how to pronounce that, drives me nuts. And I don't know, does somebody have any, Rosnar says, I like the simplicity of the language. Does anybody have any idea what that reference is at the end? And then that's the key to the poem. That's what would make it. See, I would say here, Monica says the poem moves nicely. It does. I would say that if we didn't have this last line, I would say the poem goes nowhere, but is a lovely start. And I think it would be all students trying to find where it goes. And I think, I don't know, but I don't know what this means at the end. And this is all we have, yeah. So Dvorak's music is elegiac. Yeah, and so perhaps an example of where a turn at the end just loses the audience. Funeral music, says Hammett. Yeah, I'm just not sure. Yeah, so we don't know, and it's a really interesting question. And Zeev is here, so if you want to explain, I think it's a good time to explain why going to that at the end makes sense. There's an interesting thing to play with all the time and to sort of navigate whether or not you're revealing too much, like what a regular reader, who your audience is, and what they're going to understand. And, if you want to write a poem that you have to know a reference to understand what it is, and you're okay with your audience needing that reference, that's sort of one level. If you only want people who know the reference to the sonata to understand it, then that's fine. If you want more people to understand, leaving some clues. If you want everybody to understand, make sure you include that in there. And so it depends on what you want to do with a poem. I think, to me, it's too little, because I read pretty widely. I don't know, and I don't know what it's referencing, and no one else here seems to either. Yeah. Yeah, so we want a clue, as Zeev says. And he says, without the sonata, it's useless. But then do I really care about all those dying people? No, I care only about this tiny nuisance. Tabarov says it's the title of one of his compositions. Chelsea McClellan says, I read it as a joking aside to a friend that the song drives him nuts, as if to blame the song and not the grief of loss that the song reminds him of. That's a nice interpretation. Yeah, Dry Montito says, the Dvorak sonata is too formal to be meaningful to the poem. If you want to draw a relationship between Dvorak and the story of the poem, you have to state that relationship and say which sonata. I don't know. I think that the situation. Let me pull up another poem here. Yeah. So this is Tomáš Salamun, a Slovenian poet that we published. What is this, issue 33? And so if you there's a way that there's sort of that mystery works in poems, where if you feel like you need to know something to understand it, then you feel left out. And I think what we're mostly feeling with the way this poem turns is that we're left out. But there's also a way that you can sort of, it can lead toward you thinking that there's more to the poem than like that everybody's sort of left out together, maybe is a way to put it. Okay. And so Tomáš Salamun's a great poet at doing this. Let me read a short poem that this reminds me of. It's untitled, by Tomáš Salamun, translated by Sonia Kravanja. And feel like this poem sort of lays out some of the details, and then it leaves the ending and what to conclude ambiguous, but in a way that doesn't make us feel left out, if that makes sense. Like, pay attention to that detail. Anyone who falls into an Arabic night should know that laws there are ruthless and brutal. At first one hears tingle-tangle from the high stone walls. Someone drops a rope with a basket. Leave the dates alone. Don't eat them. That's how they stop drovers. If the rope is strong enough, allow yourself to be pulled up. For 3 days I was smiling and bowing. I was just about to eat the rugs when God caught me naked. And so do you feel how, even though that poem is very disassociated, a lot of times we have really straightforward narrative poems that we talk about both in submissions and in Rattle, but there are poems that are not straightforward, that are complicated and convoluted, and you don't really understand what's going on. And yet the details sort of weave it together in a way that feels like we're not being left out, like it's the mystery of life itself that we're all engaging in, instead of this thing that we just don't know. If we just had this one fact, we could piece the whole thing together. And so I can see this poem moving in that direction more by expanding, and letting a little bit more free association come in at the ending. So it doesn't feel like if we just knew this one detail, we would understand the poem better. But if we sort of push with this idea, and maybe this is another example, like the other poems too, of taking an early exit where we could have gone further. Like, what other things could we use to expand this concept? I'm trying to find... Yeah, so without the sonata, it's useless, but then do I really care about all these dying people? No, I care only about this tiny nuisance. And so if we can sort of leap into maybe other nuisances to balance that out a little bit, so that we feel we're not like left out of the joke, And I think that's a little bit why how the one line lands in the poem. So if that makes sense. Rosenard said, who was that example by just now? That was Tomáš Salamun. Morgan Fee suggests maybe an epigraph or something. Tambarla suggests as a title, In the Lovely Classical Cities by Dvorak. Yeah. I think that's a good idea too. Yeah. So I don't know. So again, I think the poem, pushing it a little farther, I really love the details. And I really feel like the details have a lot of emotional energy behind them. I wouldn't change a word up until here. And I think maybe that's part of the turn to that. Like, we're expecting a conclusion is what makes us feel left out partly too. Dr. Keyes is the translator. Sonia Kravanja. Sorry. Why am I? Oh, I need this one. Sonia Kravanja. There you go, right down there. Anyway. So yeah, so again, I think another poem that ended too soon, and I think maybe now that I think about it more, I think the most thing is that we have the thus, and then we have this line, and that implies that the explanation is there instead of like more ephemeral. Yeah. So And also the alas also, yeah, is yeah. So I think it's great for a tight little interesting poem that just hasn't found quite the ending. And I think maybe a little more detail, a little more surprising things could play out there. And I also would change the title too. Okay. Okay, I think that was the only poem, yeah. But thanks I think that was, really, I really love those. I love that their hands are clean and empty. And then the quick shift to the green lizard. Okay, let's take a look at some more poems. But thanks for sharing that. Again, that was Zeev Smolansky. Let's take a look at some more poems. And yeah, and Zeev, I should say, is in Misher, Israel. Okay. Yeah, from Israel. All right. And now let's look at another poet. Next up is Nikki Fryer. And Nikki is from, sorry, there's two separate screens. Great Britain. Yeah. It's weird how unsubmittable, but the city and stuff is on one screen. And then if you want to see what country everybody's in, you have to go to a different screen. No general questions from Nikki. Just this poem, or two poems actually. And they're pasted into the body. So here we go. Let's give a look at these. Scroll down. This is Post-Diagnosis. And again, the poet is Nikki Fryer from Great Britain. Post-Diagnosis. And little by little, these tiny indignities turn into changes. Stalled mind then engages in smack talk and sympathies. Hands that once held you tight, rocked you gently through the night. Now move in slow motion, no skill or devotion is left, no capacity, instead the audacity of a disease that is taking all the plans we were making enraged. I sit here on the bed. Oops, did I scroll too far? All the plans we were making enraged. I sit here on the bed. It's 3 a.m. I am filled with dread, debating what my future holds as this evil curse unfolds. So this is Post-Diagnosis, and I feel like this is an example of the rhyme pulling the poem, in a way that's sort of guiding it in a way that's not surprising you. So there's sort of two. Rhyme in a poem is really a compositional device and a mimetic device too for remembering the poem later, if in the oral tradition. But there's two ways that the rhymes can draw you as a writer into new lines. And one is that you surprise yourself by having to think of something you wouldn't have thought of already. And that ends up, taking the poem in surprising places and propelling the poem forward. And formal poets, people like A. Stallings or A.M. Juster, I don't know why they use initials so much. But formal poets, cultivate that sense of like, I don't know where I would go that's surprising unless that part of my brain that was thinking about things was turned off and I'm drawn somewhere surprising by the rhyme. The other, and that's the good way to rhyme in poems. The not so good way to rhyme in poems is to have the first rhyme come to mind be the target for the next line. And I think that ends up happening here. And you can see it sort of the poem take off in the way. So we have little by little these tiny indignities turn into changes, stalled mind then engages. We have the changes, engages, which are slant rhyme. In smack talk and sympathies, the indignities and sympathies are sort of slant rhyme. And so that feels like a surprising, use of it. But then, in the next line, hands that once held you tight, rocked you gently through the night. When you stay tight, you think night. It's like that word association game. If I say, taking, it might be making that comes into your mind. Like it's like the first thought that the rhyme pulls you to, and then the sentence is being, or the poem, the next line is being pulled in that direction just to make the rhyme fit. And there's nothing surprising or engaging. And when JB says the rhyme here is very sing-songy, that's what happens. And it wasn't at first. And then you hit that sing-song line where you had the couplet right here, where it had the very sort of basic standard rhyme that you were drawn to. And then the rhymes just end up pulling the poem, and the poem doesn't really go anywhere. It's just a sort of play out of how can I fit these rhymes that I'm targeting. And Ali Rowan says, I like the half rhymes in the first stanza. So when you rhyme in poems, really, Think of surprising words, rhyme. This is A.E. Stallings' advice. I think she was on the Poetry Space talking about this too. But rhyme across parts of speech, like have a verb rhyme with a noun. Mix it up like that so you don't get into this like regular groove. And it's really easy to fall into this sing-song type pattern, but the poem falls into this and loses itself. So, hands that once held you tight, rocked you gently through the night, now move in slow motion, no skill or devotion is left, no capacity. I wonder about the period here. I think that's just an error, because it feels like it should be enjambment. No devotion is left, no capacity, instead the audacity, and I think no, also, and now that I notice, there are commas at the end of every line, even though that's not part of the punctuation. And another thing you should know is what enjambment is. So enjambment is the syntax of the line continuing on past the line into the next line. There's no need for commas here. You have a brief pause, and that's why we have line breaks in poems, because we pause while we're scanning back to the beginning of the next line. But you don't need to show that with a comma. That's actually just grammatically incorrect, and it trips up the poem. And I kind of ignored it as I was reading because it sort of makes no sense. But we want to delete these commas. I do like the audacity capacity rhyme. That's a more surprising one. But anyway, of a disease that is taking all the plans we were making. Enraged, I sit here on the bed. It's 3 a.m. I'm filled with dread. See, so bed, and then it just leads you to dread. It's just completely unsurprising where the rhymes are taking you. And that's why the poem doesn't have a lot of life. It's 3 a.m. I'm filled with dread, debating what my future holds as this evil curse unfolds. And so, I've just spoken to that. That's what we want to do. We want to do more of stuff like this, where we surprise ourselves, we spread out the rhymes maybe. We don't want to have couplets that are rhymed this easily, because that just pulls the poem away. As Wayne the Poet says, sounds like weak rap. And I mean, that's a way to put it. Yeah. Also, the poet, Rose Leonard, the poet could also think more about showing rather than telling. Emmy Arnold Fernandez says, some of the rhymes also lead the poem into trite language, e.g. rock you gently through the night. It would be more interesting to be rocked ungently or not at night, etc. And that's a good point too. And so really the what we're trying to do with poems is to subvert our expectations, to, you set up an expectation only to subvert it and do something surprising, because that's the way that you get out of these like ruts of how we think. Poems are ways out of the ruts of our our regular thinking. It's a way out of cliche. And so going to the first rhyme that you think of, or that one might think of, and just stays in the rut. We want out of the rut. And so how do you get out of the rut? You rhyme across verbs, you surprise yourself, slant rhyme, go in different places. Don't have it be this regular. So anyway, let's look at the other poem too. This is You Saved Me. For one whole day I pushed and I shoved. Unplanned does not mean unloved. I'll say it again. It becomes our refrain, a muddled mess of fear and joy. You saved me, my sweet boy. Your heartbeat plays percussion as a symphony takes hold. Crescendos rise and fall away, and melodies unfold. The ebb and flow, both fast and slow, though nature leaves it quite to chance. My body somehow knows the dance, a tangled web of fear and joy. You saved me, my sweet baby boy. The ancestors bear witness, neatly lined up by the bed, and for a beat I wonder if I'll wind up dead instead. My outsides are in and my insides are out. 1 minute I'm still, then pacing about. From the depths of my soul comes a guttural sound. As a wave after wave, pain starts to compound. And just as I think I can't take it anymore, you break through and let out a cavernous roar. In a distant forest deep and lonesome... where'd I go? In a distant forest, deep, a lonesome wolf lies down to sleep. A doting wife and crinkling skin, her soulmate slowly lowered in, as evening's shadows start to creep, begins again to wail and weep. Committed to the sacred ground, you meet my gaze without a sound. His flint gray eyes light up your smile. He lingers here but a brief while. A litany of fear and joy. You come to save me, my dear boy. So again, all the same things apply. It's reading through the rhyme. It's leading toward the rhyme is what it's doing. Aspects I like, though, I like the refrain. You came to save me, dear boy. And having that come through, and think about things that you can rhyme off that refrain that are surprising. Not joy, but like look up a rhyming dictionary. Go to rhymezone.com, find rhymes or near rhymes that are really surprising and see how you can fit those in. Sorry. So surprise rhymes. But yeah, same comments. Also, more detail. There's a lot of show don't tell going on, as I think Emily Arnold Fernandez mentioned. Specific details like we've been talking about all this episode. One of the things, I thought about this too. It's the same. What is it? Anapestic trimeter. The meter ish reminds me of Night Before Christmas. It's anapestic tetrameter. Okay. So let's pull that up though, which is actually a visit from St. Nicholas, which I did not know. But look at this. I'm just going to pull this up really quickly, just so we can highlight the difference. 'Twas the night before Christmas when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there. So here we have care and there. Notice those different rhymes. And the details are building a scene. Like we have specific details here in this poem. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there. The children were nestled all snug on their beds while visions of sugar plums danced in their heads. You can see that. It's all those concrete details. It's not the rhyme itself, although the regular rhyme is nice. And the regular meter works nicely. And if you're going to do meter, it's flawless meter. You have to really learn meter and actually make sure that the meter's right, because in a few lines here the meter's off, but it's similar meter to this. But it's those details. It's Mama in her kerchief and I in my cap. It's those things that build up the scene. It's storytelling through scene building, that's happening in this poem, which is why it's a famous, memorable poem. It's the rhythm, and the meter makes it easy to recite and sound nice on the tongue as you say it. And then it's the way that through that meter builds stories through specific details and images that make it work. And so if we go back to this, there's no lines like, for the whole day I pushed and shoved, unplanned does not mean unloved in a visit from St. Nicholas. We have a scene that's building with actual details. It's not a muddled mess of fear and joy. Things actually happen. There's specificity. So anyway, let's do one more. Why not? So that's it. Same things for both these poems, but really, make the rhymes surprise you. Let's do one more submission for today. And last but not least, this was so I should say it again who the poet was. That was Nicky Fryer from Great Britain. And we'll do one more. And next is Brandis Askin from Florida. So we started in Florida, we're coming back to Florida. And there are two poems here. Any questions from Brandon? Both of these poems were longer and I cut down quite a bit. I'm wondering if the new revisions work. Okay. So let's see what we've got here. Upon hearing that deaths by alcohol spiked 26%. During the pandemic, I drank doubles, a social worker socializing through a mask on a maternity ward. Each day brought a new Rona revelation. The virus was vaudeville magic show. Headliner, believe the unbelievable. Seeing death's face daily, we lost our own. I woke up one morning to find myself a soldier, told to do my job in new COVID scrubs. That paycheck for rent is binding as a blood oath. A coworker brought in cloth masks made by neighbors adorned with polka dots, paisley, and puppy dogs. We hoped thin fabric stretched across mouths was enough to block violent particles. A doctor thought masks skittish, our eyes fearful like animals she hunted. Raised speaking spirit tongues, the armor of God's righteousness was all the protection she needed. Doubt was a daily hymn. No one knew the way. Founding fables of religious rites drizzled on freedom. Baked on 2020 heat into a casserole we chewed and screened void without tasting. When the vaccine came, our numbers allotted by how often we unblocked an airway or reached into a throat. We waited like a middle school lunch line, trying not to cut for a thin needle shield to separate us from the viral fear. As I came home every night, Brain thick from fluorescent lights, flash frames of moments snapping, tacking to my mind. I drank to stop the memories, to dull the isolation, trying to close the curtain on the surreal show. Yeah. So, so for this one, you have to be careful, first of all, with COVID poems, because there are so many COVID poems. I mean, it's like 9/11, after 9/11, and I was around shortly after 9/11, we were still getting 9/11 poems all the time in 2004, and it's like, I remember thinking to myself, God, I'm not going to publish another 9/11 poem, and then there'd be one that was interesting, and you'd publish another one, but the COVID is like 9/11 on steroids. It's like everybody experienced it. There's so many experiences, and the Chapbook Prize the year after, it was COVID Diaries, or COVID Notebook was like 2/3 of the titles, it seemed. And still, and so you have to have like interesting things to say, and you have to really think about the fact that there's there's a million poems literally written about COVID. So what aspects are unique is what one of the things that should be in the front of your mind when you're talking about one of these topics that is written about and written about and written about. And so this perspective is interesting. So let's, upon hearing that deaths by alcohol spiked 26%, it's an interesting detail. So we have that. Jamie Thomas says, or maybe Dry Montillo said, I like the clarity. This is Dry Montillo. I like the clarity of the situation, the stakes. The poem has natural power to it. And then Jamie Thomas replies, says, I agree. This is a great writer, and I'd like to see them with a different topic. Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. It's tough to be interested in COVID poems at this point. And that's a real drawback from this topic. But, poetry is a way to get through personal experience too, so it's still worth writing about. It's going to be harder to find a home for it, I think. Anyway, upon hearing that deaths by alcohol spiked 26%, during the pandemic, I drank doubles, a social worker socializing through a mask on a maternity ward. It's a really nice opening, good details, good rhythm to that description. So I like that aspect of it. Each day brought a new Rona revelation. The virus was a vaudeville magic show. Headliner, believe the unbelievable. Seeing death's face daily, we lost our own. And where the poem is working, and we say this all the time, but it just always applies. Where we're describing things with specificity in like concrete detail, the poem really works. Where we get moralizing and sort of commentating, the poem doesn't have as much energy, because we want to build this story that we ourselves can react to with an emotional way. And so, every day brought a new Rona revelation. It's sort of okay, but then it pushes it in this direction. The virus was a vaudeville magic show, a headliner, believe the unbelievable, seeing death's face daily, we lost our own. That's just, it pulls out of that general, it becomes more general again, and it's just not as strong. So it's like, this is a cut. This is sort of like summarizing in this section. You can just cut this. During the pandemic, I drank doubles, a social worker socializing through a mask on a maternity ward. I woke up one morning to find myself a soldier, told to do my job in new COVID scrubs. So nothing is lost by that, so cut that. And then, in new COVID scrubs, that paycheck for rent is binding as a blood oath. A coworker brought a cloth mask made by neighbors, adorned with polka dots, paisley, and puppy dogs. We get these details, which are nice. And the story really starts here. We hope thin fabric stretched across mouths with enough, and to block the violent particles. I mean, calling them violent particles, is more that telling, not showing, and we don't need it again. We hoped thin fabric stretched across mouths was enough, and that's enough. Ironically, put the period right there and just cut that off. Yeah. A doctor thought masks skittish, our eyes fearful like the animals she hunted. I'm not sure about that line. A doctor thought masks skittish? That's a little confusing. Why would the masks be skittish? Anyway, our eyes fearful like the animals she hunted. Raised, speaking spirit tongues. The armor of God's righteousness was all the protection she needed. Doubt was a daily hymn. And so again, here we get a little bit more of that, more summarizing, telling voice. And so, So sticking with the details, tell it straight and tell it with a slant, but don't explain how we're supposed to feel, don't insert that opinion in there, because the poem just isn't as strong if we don't come to those conclusions ourselves. Doubt was a daily hymn, no one knew the way. And that's the same thing there. Founding fables of religious rites drizzled on freedom, baked on 2020 heat into a casserole we chewed and screened without tasting. When the vaccine came, our numbers allotted by how often we unblocked an airway or reached into a throat. See, that's a great detail. So the thing that's really fascinating about this poem is the direct experience. It's like knowing what it was like, because we all experienced, COVID in a different way, but very few of us as a first line medical responder, and so those are the details that are really interesting to the general public and the people who will be reading this poem. And so the vaccine being allotted by how often we unblocked an airway or reached into a throat is a really interesting thing to think about. And then that feeling, we waited like a middle school lunch line trying not to cut, and that's the kind of thing that you could even go into more detail describing too. I mean, that's a really interesting detail too. You don't really think of the fact that doctors were waiting in line feeling like it was middle school for that, and so that's a really interesting part of the poem. As I came home every night, brain thick from fluorescent lights. I do like that detail. Someone pointed out, I think it was maybe Mark Grenier earlier, that's a nice detail. Flash frames of moments snapping, tacking to my mind. I drank to stop the memories, to dull the isolation, trying to close the curtain on the surreal show. And I think here, we end up, and I think that's just in general, and Brandon's here, so it's nice to good timing that Brandon was here this week when we got to his, or Brandis, sorry, was here when we got to the poems. But I think that impulse to tell and to generalize after these really great details is a thing to pull back on. I think we get that at the end here, too. I drank the stuff. So this is the why. Every poem has a why it was going to be written. And this is like a direct explanation of the why, instead of letting us experience the why. This is the conclusion that we should draw from the poem. I drank to stop the memories, to dull the isolation, trying to close the curtain on the surreal show. Like, explaining why I drank is like where we're getting to. And we want to have that conclusion. We want to come to that conclusion ourselves and not be told about it. And that's the way we actually feel it, because it's a direct transfer of that experience is what we're trying to achieve. And that's why show don't tell is a thing. So we creep into telling instead of showing. And that's the only thing that holds the poem back, because there are really great, interesting details about it. Okay. And one more poem here. I'll try to be quicker with this. But that was, again, Brandis Askin from Florida with this poem upon hearing that deaths by alcohol spiked 26%. Let's see what the other one is, too. Over the Golden Gate. On a mountain peak overlooking the 8-bit city of gold dreams and computer chips, cars circle a highway pass full of travelers seeking selfie spots, mental maps marked by images. Today he arrives without a guide on the mountain trail after days of driving to leave childhood behind. For years he lost himself, galloped a horse across virtual fields, danced through screens of goblins, and dazzled a horde, far from the cuffs of his father and the searing ring of the cigarette. The name of his chosen character was Sour, a mask of sound hiding his mouth. Now, bent-kneed and cold, he scrambles up the mountain trail, awash in fog, fingers reach to touch anything. Above the city where code is braille, and drones buzz like a cage of sizzling bees in the wind, his mind paints other worlds. Over the woods, hidden elves and spirit armies dart through the forest. Here he realizes he can become, at last, what he is yet to be, obscured. Okay, and, yeah. So as Emily, so for the last one, I think this is a good point, and it's worth mentioning. So Emmy Arnold Fernandez says, so would showing be something more like I drank and the curtain closed the show? And we're looking back at this poem. And instead of, I drank to stop the memories, to dull the isolation. And so we, that's the kind of thing. And maybe that's a little too telling too, but it's a lot closer. You're just showing the actual drinking here and letting us come to that realization is what we mean. So back to this one. Again, there's really nice details. Code is braille, as Hemant Malik points out. But then Morgan Feeney, the ending feels a bit too premeditated, perhaps. And again, the same thing comes up, where it's that summarizing feel instead of letting us come to conclusions ourselves. And that's what premeditated means, but Morgan Feeney's saying. Yeah, so really good details though through. So over the Golden Gate, we get a sense of setting there through that title. On a mountain peak overlooking the 8-bit city, I think 8-bit city is a really cool description of that, of gold dreams and computer chips, cars circle a highway pass full of travelers seeking selfie spots. I think travelers seeking selfie spots is great. The mental maps marked by images, see the difference between the highway, cars circle a highway pass full of travelers seeking selfie spots. How that's a really, really specific detail. Mental maps marked by images, it's sort of hard to follow a little bit. It's a more vague description. And I think it's unnecessary, so I'd cut that line. Today he arrives without a guide on the mountain trail after days of driving to leave childhood behind. And again, so we get that to leave childhood behind. Again, that's the summarizing voice that's leading us along, holding our hands and not letting us sort of experience life for ourselves. And there's a metaphor for parenting in there too. Treat poems like kids who are going to grow and not into kids that aren't going to be able to experience the world for themselves. That's part of it too. Anyway, for years he lost himself, galloped a horse across virtual fields, danced through screens of goblins, and dazzled a horde. I'm thinking this is video games. The virtual fields, the goblins. Far from the cuffs of his father and the searing ring of the cigarette. I think that's a really nice detail, the searing ring of the cigarette and the cuffs. The name of his chosen character was sour, a mask of sound hiding his mouth. Now bent-kneed and cold. Bent-kneed needs a hyphen, by the way. And cold, he scrambles up the mountain, trail awash in fog, fingers reach to touch anything. So at this point, I get a sense of where the poem is going, and I'm wondering, what's going to be the revelation at the top of this hill. Above the city where the code is braille, again, I like that description, and drones buzz like a cage of sizzling bees in the wind. Now that's a nice line too. It's a how we kind of pile on detail in that. If it was just drone, and drones buzz, that'd be boring, but then like a cage is interesting, and then of sizzling bees, so we expand, so we get that more detailed and interesting every edition, and on the wind too. His mind paints other worlds over the woods, hidden elves and spirit armies dart through the forest. So again, we've set up the poem. Mark Greener says there's abuse in this at its center, and I agree too. And I think it hasn't gone all the way to where it wants to explore. He realizes he can become at last what he has yearned to be, obscured. Instead of having the summary, what could the figure in this poem do to enact that? And don't do something melodramatic like jump off the cliff or something, but what surprising gesture, imagine what this is actually a character in a film you're watching. What could the character do to represent this? Yeah, Rosenauer says it's another case of taking the first exit ramp, and I think it is. I think we really, it's a little bit different than an exit ramp, because it's like I'm sort of done writing, and it's more like that that other line where it was like I gave up. It's sort of like giving up and just summarizing. This is kind of what I wanted to say. And plopping it in instead of exploring that and seeing where that detail takes you more spontaneously. So push the poem, delete the things that were summarizing and push the poem a little farther to end on an image instead of a thought or a concept or an idea. End on an image instead of an idea, and that'll let us come to the idea and actually experience it more strongly. His mind paints other worlds over the woods, hidden elves and spirit armies dart through the forest. You could say his breath in the mist fading away, like that, and then ending it hanging there. There's some way you could end it that, Rosenauer says maybe allow a bit of magical realism in fantasy world. Yeah. So anyway, the poem, it gets to a point where it's thinking on an emotional level, and then it sort of gives up. So push it farther and see what's worth exploring there. How can you keep the poem going? Okay, well, that's going to wrap it up. It's 20 minutes past when I'm supposed to wrap it up, but thanks, everybody, for being here with me. It's always so much fun. And that was Brandon's Askin with 2 poems. Over the Golden Gate was the most recent. Thanks for sharing those, Brandon. If you're still here, do click the like button. I forgot to say that at some point. There's still 3 times as many people watching as have clicked like. So click like and help other people see this later, because it is helpful, I think. Well, I know it's extremely helpful, and if you follow the advice here, you'd be publishing a lot more, is the truth of it. So, and as all people here can attest, once you start engaging with the critique of the week, your writing really takes off, because this is how writing functions and how you make that experience of taking the top people's heads off. So, anyway, if you do enjoy this, please do click the like button to let more people be helped by it. All right, so coming up this week on the Rattlecast, the guest is going to be, let me pull this, where'd it go? The guest is going to be Lexi Pell. And so Lexi is a veteran of Poets Respond. She's had a bunch of poems, I think maybe 4 in the last 2 or 3 years, if I remember right. She also she pulls up interesting news stories and writes poems about them. She's got a great poem called Diet Coke, which Sherman Lexi wrote and told me it was one of his favorite poems he'd read in a long time. It's a great poem from Rattle last year. She has a book out, Let Go with the Lights On, that we'll be talking about too, as well as some new poems. And the prompt for this week was to... Let me pull it up. The prompt for this week was to think of a time you traveled. Write a poem that reimagines that journey, but set in a different time period. So that was Katie's prompt for this week. Think of a time you traveled, but then moved to a different time period and imagine it there. That's me, your prompt. The guest is going to be Lexi Pell. As I mentioned before, the Poetry Space just dropped 2. That's Katie's show that I do with her. Dick Westheimer's there. Dick had 2 great examples. He had a poem of his own, which is a really wonderful poem, and a poem written by AI. And we had to try to figure out which one was which was an interesting experiment too. So experience that along with us. Maybe pause to make your own prediction before we talk about more when we get to that spot. But it was a really great episode, so do watch that. Again, you can find the Poetry Space on iTunes or Spotify or whatever. But Lexi Pell will be the guest this Sunday, December 8th, the regular time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Hope to see you there on the Rattlecast. We'll have a great weekend in the meantime. We'll talk to you later. Goodbye.